Hey guys, it's Mike here, and I just saw Birds of Prey, the fantabulous emancipation of one Harley Quinn. Now, as you might imagine, I wasn't particularly excited for this film. I've been a fan of the Harley Quinn character ever since I was a kid, when she first debuted in Batman the Animated Series. She was a fun addition to the Batman lore and gave the Joker a fun sidekick to bounce off of, in more ways than one. In the years since then, DC has added her to the comics and experimented a lot with her character, in some good ways, in some bad. With her now being more of a standalone anti-hero, who shifts between the good and bad sides depending upon the storyline. Her live-action debut in the DC Extended Universe, or whatever it's supposed to be called, was solid. Although her depiction wasn't exactly the Harley Quinn that most fans knew from the comics, especially when it came to her outfit, which was changed for exceedingly obvious reasons, Margot Robbie was a great casting choice and did a good job with the role, standing out as one of the positives in Suicide Squad, a movie that most people have no love for. Despite all of that, I had no real excitement or interest in seeing Birds of Prey, a sentiment that it seems like the majority of the movie-going audience shares, since barely anyone is going to the theater to see it. I know that was the case with my theater, since there were about 5 other people in it, despite it being opening weekend and at the busiest theater in my area. But based on just the promotional material alone, I can't blame any of them for not showing up. From the trailers, nothing in this movie looked particularly good. The casting was off for some roles, the costumes looked bad, and the story looked mediocre at best. But the biggest turnoff was likely what it usually is for movies like this: the in-your-face politics and so-called wokeness, something which is shown to alienate audiences time and time again. But with all of that being said, I decided to see this movie nonetheless. As a reviewer and a DC Comics fan, I wanted to give this film a fair chance and see if maybe the marketing was wrong. Maybe it was a good movie, with a bad presentation, and DC had learned from their past mistakes as a movie studio. But unfortunately, upon seeing the movie, this was far from the case. Rather, this movie is worse than the trailers make it out to be, and likely the worst movie in the entire DCEU. So in this review, I'm going to explain exactly why this movie is so bad, and tell you just what happens during it. Now, I'm sure that most of you won't be seeing it or don't care about spoilers, but for those of you who do, you might as well turn back now, because I'm gonna spoil the shit out of it. Because this movie doesn't deserve your hard-earned money. So without further ado, let's get into this review with the paper-thin so-called plot of the movie, which is mostly just there as an excuse to string along ridiculous scenes with Harley Quinn. So Birds of Prey tells the story of Harley Quinn for most of its runtime. She just broke up with the Joker, entirely off-screen of course, and now she wants to prove to the world that she can stand alone as her own person. However, because of her years of crime and misdeeds, she's attracted the attention of a number of criminals around Gotham City, who want to kill her now that the Joker isn't there to protect her, with the biggest villain of the bunch being Black Mask, played by Ewan McGregor, a crime boss who has a penchant for cutting off the faces of his victims. During this, Renee Montoya, played by Rosie Perez, is a cop trying to bring down Black Mask and finds out he's having a diamond brought into Gotham City that contains the bank account numbers for a wealthy crime family who was massacred years before. However, complications arise when a pickpocket named Cassandra Cain steals the diamond and swallows it. So Harley Quinn makes a deal with Black Mask to find the girl and get the diamond back in exchange for her safety. Meanwhile, Black Canary and Montoya try to protect the girl and get the diamond back for themselves, all while the vigilante Huntress tries to get revenge for her murdered family. And of course, complications arise when Black Mask decides to pull a John Wick and put out a huge bounty on Cassandra. So Harley and the other female fighters must band together to try and fend off these criminals, save the day, and defeat all of the evil men who are trying to oppress them. Now honestly, this synopsis of the plot is far more comprehensible and understandable than how it plays out in the movie itself. But before I get into that, I want to discuss some of the positives of the movie. First, I want to give credit to Margot Robbie for her performance as Harley Quinn. Though I don't like the portrayal of Harley Quinn in these movies, I think that Robbie was a great casting choice, and she does her best with the material she's given, even when the material is this script. The same goes for Ewan McGregor. I've been a fan of his for a long time, with him playing Obi-Wan Kenobi in the Star Wars prequels, and being really good in films like Trainspotting. His performance as Black Mask was one of the main reasons I went to see this movie, and much like with the prequels, prequels, he stands out as a positive among the problematic film around him. He puts in a strong performance, which is at times very over the top, and you can tell he's having a blast as this character. Now, Black Mask's portrayal is kind of a different matter, but once again he shows off his acting talent here. There was also some decent action at points in this movie. They actually brought in John Wick director Chad Stahelski to handle the action sequences and reshoots, and you can tell, because it's better than you would expect in a movie like this. Although some of them are kind of iffy. They're more believable with Harley Quinn and Mary Elizabeth Winstead's Huntress, who use weapons during the fights, than they are with others like Rosie Perez, who is fighting criminals twice her size in hand-to-hand combat. It's like Danny Ramos in Terminator Dark Fate. Totally unbelievable. There were also some nice looking shots and set pieces during the movie, such as one sequence where Harley is temporarily knocked out and we see a dance sequence, which reminded me a lot of The Big Lebowski, or another one where she goes into a fun house during the third act, which is very atmospheric, along with the scene that takes place on a pier. I also generally enjoyed the score of this movie. It had some good and popular song selections, much like Suicide Squad, but they were too on the nose at points. Like a scene where Black Canary sings "It's a Man's World" while Black Mask is doing business, which might as well be her singing "Message" as the lyrics. And I would also have to mention the cool animated intro to the film, showing off Harley's backstory. It was a lot like what they did in Deadpool 2, however it did seem at odds with the DCEU version of some elements, such as the Joker, since they were depicting a version more like Mark Hamill's than Jared Leto. And speaking of Jared Leto's Joker, there was actually a kind of cameo from him during a flashback scene. However, this was likely a body double since they only show Joker from behind, similar to how Superman was shown from the neck down in Shazam. I'm not sure if that's because they couldn't get Leto for the movie or maybe they're parting ways with him after Joaquin Phoenix's Joker, but a lot of this film did seem kind of like a meta-commentary about that dynamic, with Harley Quinn breaking up with him and destroying Ace Chemicals. So I wonder if it was WB's way of symbolizing the end of Leto's Joker, or maybe I'm just reading too much into things. Who knows? Either way, I think it would have been more impactful if we actually saw their breakup on screen. Now to begin with the cons, I'll get back to the plot because this movie's narrative is borderline incoherent at times. The whole film is narrated by Harley Quinn, who is telling it from her perspective, which is probably in part unreliable. But the annoying aspect of it is that she keeps stopping the story at various points, only to then jump backward or forward in time by long periods of time. Like for example, there's a scene where she walks into the Gotham police station with a beanbag shotgun and then just starts randomly shooting people in the face. Then they freeze frame and jump back in time to days before just to explain how they got there. And it goes on for a long period of time. The same thing happens when Huntress is formally introduced in the movie. Now there's a character who's introduced who's a Taiwanese restaurant owner who's helping Harley Quinn out. And Huntress shows up and is about to say her name when it's interrupted and we jarringly jump back in time to show the murder of the crime family who was actually her family all along. And the thing is that it's being done intentionally and for comedic effect, but it really doesn't work. Instead, it hurts the pacing and flow of the movie. People complained about all the flashback scenes in Suicide Squad, but I'd say that this one handled them worse at times. And getting back to the shootout, this movie can be really illogical at times. I know it's a comic book movie, so that's kind of expected, but this verges on Looney Tunes levels at points. Like, you mean to tell me that Harley can just walk into GCPD, shoot the guy at the desk with no one hearing it, and then take out all the cops solo while they don't even defend themselves? She'd be killed in seconds. There are also points in the movie where she randomly changes clothing or puts on roller skates, and characters comment on it, such as how she had no time to put them on, like in a cartoon. Then she proceeds to be in a car chase on roller skates and is perfectly uninjured when it's over. And there's even a scene where Huntress uses her motorcycle and spins out and crashes it just to give Harley enough momentum to catch up to the car, even though she's on a motorcycle and could of course catch up to it without ever even doing that. The whole thing is just poorly written, and combined with the weak editing, it feels more like a collection of Harley Quinn scenes strung together than a movie. And on that topic, it's not even a real Birds of Prey movie. Like 80% of this movie is about Harley Quinn, and the characterization of the others is severely lacking. I thought maybe this would be resolved around the halfway point, when you would naturally expect the group to get together, but they only get together near the end, and when they do, they're just so underwhelming. They're not real friends, they barely even know each other or have any screen time together, so it's totally unearned. And it feels like they team up just because the movie says they have to and we're supposed to care. Because hey, it's that comic book group you've heard of. Remember that? Did you clap because you knew what it was? But the truth is, they aren't the real Birds of Prey. They're only those characters in name alone, because they lack any real comic book accuracy. Their backstories are largely different, their costumes look nowhere near as cool as the ones from the comics or cartoons, and the casting is simply off for some of them. Take for example, Mary Elizabeth Winstead as Huntress. Now she clearly got in better shape for the role and was fine with the physicality and action, but her acting was really weak, with emotionless line reads, and her character also has an awkward social tic, kind of like Ezra Miller's Flash, and it just didn't work. Black Canary, played by Journey Smollett-Bell, was a totally different character from the real Black Canary. She was done far better in Arrow and the Timverse. Victor Zsasz was also in this, but he might as well have been a different character too. He was really over the top, and he was wasted here just like he was in Batman Begins. And Cassandra Cain is also significantly changed, and is also the weakest acting of the entire movie, which isn't a good thing when her and her dynamic with Harley Quinn is supposed to represent a kind of heart or conscience of the story. There was also a lot of dumb humor in this movie, with perhaps the biggest example being Perez, who wore an "I shave my balls for this t-shirt" to a serious meeting with her police captain. Yet the movie tells us we're supposed to feel bad for and root for this person when they're not being respected in the workplace. And sure, sometimes comedy trumps logic, but most of this stuff isn't even funny. But perhaps the biggest problem, or the one most likely to be focused on, is that the politics of this movie are way too blatant and in your face throughout. I'm all for equality, but the whole film just screams aggressive feminism. All the men in this film are evil, murderers, sexual predators, or incompetent. They all take credit for the strong women's work, like with Rosie Perez's partner at GCPD. The only seemingly redeemable man in the movie is the Taiwanese restaurant owner. And of course, he just so happens to sell out Harley Quinn because, oh, I was given a lot of money and I could start a better restaurant. And again, there's a scene where Black Canary sings the message at the audience so loudly, it shatters glass. Most, if not all the women are portrayed as better than the men around them. Practically every fight scene is them beating up men in brutal ways. There's very ham-fisted dialogue about men owning women, and Harley not being able to stand alone without a man, and her wanting to be emancipated and basically destroy the patriarchy, with only slightly different words. It makes Captain Marvel look downright subtle by comparison, although some claim it was. And I've seen a number of other reviewers claim that there was nothing woke about this movie, and I just have to wonder, what movie were they even watching? Maybe they just fell asleep during all the obvious symbolism. I know I almost did. But the thing that seems really contradictory is that all of these characters are murderers, thieves, or criminals. At no time does it come off that this is the point of the film either, or that they and their actions aren't being glorified despite that. Harley Quinn sells Cassandra out, then says she's a shitty person, but immediately afterward she has triumphant fights and is presented in a positive light come her showdown with Black Mask. So the fact that they're being presented as more virtuous than anyone undercuts the message they're attempting and failing to deliver. Now, I'm not one of those people who think that you can't portray bad people in any way redeeming. Joker was a great example of how to do it in an effective way and make the audience empathize with them. And it was inspired by the works of Martin Scorsese, who's the king of doing this. But Joker handled that and its subtext with far more care than Birds of Prey. And ultimately, all this movie did was have me rolling my eyes and groaning internally throughout, which obviously wasn't the intent. However, there was one thing that did actually piss me off in this movie, and that's what happens at the end of the film, where they made the worst decision they could have and killed off Black Mask. One of the main reasons I and many others came to see this movie was Ewan McGregor as this character. So naturally, they had to end the film in the most annoying way possible for myself and most comic book fans, by killing off a recurring character from the comics and shows in his first movie. I've always hated when comic book movies do this, especially when it's a part of a cinematic universe, because they establish a character and make you think about the possibilities with them in other interactions they could have with different characters in other movies, and then they flush it all down the toilet because derp, he's the bad guy so he has to die. For fuck's sake, WB, it's like you went out of your way to fuck this movie up and piss off your audience. kids. Was it really worth it? They did Ewan McGregor dirty here, and I feel bad that he won't be able to be this character in a good comic book movie. Although I guess it's hard for anyone to survive this thing. And honestly, after watching it all play out, I don't know if I even want to see some of them again. I don't want to see any of the Birds of Prey again in the future with their lame costumes and unfaithful depictions. Even Margot Robbie as Harley is kind of questionable now. I feel like this movie and Suicide Squad have utterly ruined her. She was a great casting choice and gives a good performance, but ultimately, after these past two movies, I don't know if there's any way of this version coming back. I certainly don't want to see a continuation of this story if she does. So if anything, I'd rather they just retcon it or ignore it and have her show up without the tattoos, dressed in her iconic outfit, and then saying it was all some kind of delusion. So with all of that out of the way, I get back to the question of, is Birds of Prey the worst DCEU movie? And in many ways, I'd say yes. This is the least I've enjoyed a DCEU movie on my first viewing. I even enjoyed Suicide Squad and Justice League more. At least Suicide Squad didn't have the entire film shoving politics down our throats. Some of the characters were also better defined and more accurate than here too, which goes to show you how bad of a job they did with this movie. I've rewatched all of the DCEU movies since they came out, but I have no intention of ever watching this one again. And I think that speaks volumes about it. As far as the box office performance, will it flop? Well, I went to the nicer, busier theater and saw this in their version of digital IMAX, and barely anyone was there. I got my ticket the night before, and every seat was empty at the time. So I got to sit right in the center and see this crap with pristine Dolby Atmos audio in all of its big budget glory. Just imagine all the good low budget movies they could have made instead. They might have even drawn a profit. So with all these blatantly political films bombing at the box office, even with popular characters and franchises, you have to wonder how long Hollywood is going to keep this up for. It's obvious that those behind the scenes don't care about creating a quality film, nor do they have any understanding of how to do it if they tried. All they care about is promoting their message and getting brownie points from their industry and same-minded friends, high-fiving one another while these companies lose millions of dollars every single time. It simply doesn't work. People don't like to have overt politics preached to them in movies like this. No one wants a timeless, popular franchise and characters they love to suddenly start hitting them over the head with a mallet made from divisive, polarizing politics of today. Not only does it alienate the audience, but it dates these movies. And I doubt that people decades from now will be remembering this trend fondly. One of the best elements of the Timverse was the setting. In Batman the Animated Series, the backdrop was the early 20th century when the comic was created, mixed with the present. As a result, it felt both nostalgic and timeless. If it ever touched on politics or real-life matters, it did so with far more tact than Birds of Prey. As a result, it still holds up decades later, and is far better than anything WB has done with the DCEU. It also made an entire generation of fans who stuck around and decided to go see these movies when they came to theaters. Movies like this are not creating new fans for DC or any of the franchises that do this. They are driving away their real fan base that has actually cared and paid money for their intellectual properties for decades. Most of these so-called new fans don't support these films in theaters. They likely wait for streaming or sail the high seas. And at the end of the day, the movie business is just that, a business. That negative number adds up fast. This entire practice is not self-sustaining. I'm just hoping this movie was a carryover from the previous establishment at DC Films. Movies like Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Shazam, and Joker have shown that they can make great successful films with their characters. Wonder Woman proves that people are more than willing to see female-led superhero movies as long as they're actually good and don't scream a political message at the audience. That's why Wonder Woman 1984 and Black Widow are going to succeed while this fails, because they actually look good and aren't just trying to push a political narrative. Honestly, I'm tired of even talking about the politics of popcorn movies at this point. I'm not one of those channels who makes constant videos about how they want everything to fail just to cash in on the algorithm and spread further negativity. I want all these franchises that I've loved since I was a kid to be good. I want DC and Star Wars to be just as big and successful as Marvel. But those running it care more about social engineering and divisive politics than quality. So at this point, I'm probably just going to start seeing it like I do CGI. There's way too much of it in blockbusters, and it's largely misused and unnecessary. But it's done because the filmmakers involved are incapable of working without it. So overall, Birds of Prey is a bad movie. It's the worst movie in the DCEU, Worlds of DC, or whatever we're supposed to call this cinematic universe. Don't go see it, though I doubt you will anyway since it's bombing hard and you just watched this review, which is a lot longer than I was expecting. So thanks for watching up to this point. My recommendation is just to watch one of the good DC movies instead. Or better yet, watch Batman the Animated Series, since none of the movies have come close to it and I'm not sure they ever will. At least Joker was great. Hopefully that's a bigger sign of what's to come for DC than this, because if it's more of this, I might just stay home, like everyone else did. Make sure to subscribe to this channel and enable notifications so you can see all of my content right away when it comes out.
Yeah, and you better subscribe.